whether we're talking about this as DEI work or other types of work, many of these principles still hold true. And this idea that employees at all levels committed to engage in doing the work is important for any type of work that we do in our organization, including DEI work. And obviously, I identify myself as a diversity, equity, and inclusion scholar, but my broader field of study is organizational behavior. And so I can tell you that research says, regardless of whether we're talking about DEI work or other work tasks, this idea of feeling that your work is valued and feeling that your organization values your work is really important for people's willingness to actually do the work.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Better Works Podcast, People Fundamentals. I'm your host, Alex Lerald, Senior Director of Corporate Marketing. Better Works' core belief in people fundamentals revolves around enabling everyone in the workforce to strive for excellence, to foster creativity, and to acknowledge each individual's contributions. Better Works translates these beliefs into business fundamentals through strategic HR leadership. And in this show, we're diving even deeper into these principles as we hear from the experts about how you can make them come alive in your organization. This episode, adapted from a webinar in the Better Works People Fundamentals series, is an enlightening conversation with Dr. Stephanie Creary about the modern landscape and implementation of diversity, equity, and inclusion standards. All too often, DEI is a check-the-box annual training and is mentioned at a couple of company events. But real organizational change comes from giving DEI proper focus and importance in the organization, making it a real goal and tying it to performance and action. Dr. Creary is an identity and diversity scholar, a field researcher, and an assistant professor at the Wharton School of Business at the University of Pennsylvania. Her research centers around the creation of more inclusive and equitable workplaces through positive relational practices. She's a leading voice in her field, and she's also the author of the captivating article, How to Elevate Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Work in Your Organization, which I definitely recommend checking out. We'll include a link to it in the show notes. In our conversation, Dr. Creary dives into the multifaceted landscape of modern DEI initiatives. She discusses the crucial distinction between engaging in DEI activities and truly valuing and empowering these efforts. And rethinking your approach to DEI and your advocacy for it may be more important than ever. Research shows that corporate DEI efforts have fallen by almost 20% in the past 2 years. Maybe it's on the minds of fewer CEOs, but given employees' strong inclinations toward fairness and equity, that's just another reason that HR leaders need to keep it on the front burner. Dr. Creary sheds light on the dynamics that shape the true essence of valuing DEI work and its broader implications in the workplace. From actionable insights to tangible strategies, we'll explore how to set measurable DEI goals and elevate DEI work internally and externally. We also discuss how leaders and managers can participate in behavior-based DEI trainings, identify and empower DEI sponsors, and integrate DEI work as a core responsibility within job roles. Join us as we unravel the MERIT, that's MERIT framework. It's based on the concept of meritocracy. MERIT serves as a roadmap to create inclusive and equitable workplaces, making DEI work an integral part of our organizational journey. Stay tuned for a dynamic conversation with Dr. Creary. We hope it inspires change and drives meaningful impact within your organizations. Whether you're a frontline employee, a middle manager, or a company's diversity officer, understanding how to champion and invest in DEI work is key to driving meaningful change. Here's how Dr. Creary explains the dynamics that shape how we value DEI work and what it means for the workplace.
So I want to kick us off with some of the insights that I have to share with you today by talking about definitely DEI work, diversity, equity, inclusion work. And I want to differentiate the idea that many of us do and many of our organizations do lots of kinds of DEI work, right? And there are various people doing DEI work. There are chief diversity officers doing this work and diversity councils and employee resource groups. There are HR leaders. There are frontline employees. There are middle managers. There are lots of people doing things that we would consider DEI work. And this work can include things like diversity training, whether you're participating or leading it, diversity recruiting, mentoring and sponsorship, participating in business or ERG groups, creating policies, reinforcing policies. So there's any number of things that we could be doing in our roles that would be largely characterized as DEI work. But there's a difference between doing these activities and actually valuing these activities when they are done. So many of us do them because we have to do them. Many of us do them because we're passionate about doing them. But that doesn't mean that we always, as individuals, as a part of a team, as leaders, as organizations, show that this work is valuable. And as we begin to think about valuing DEI work, let's think about this idea that in order for this work, just like any task that we have as marketers, as HR leaders, as professors, these jobs cannot be done effectively. This work cannot be done effectively unless there is adequate staffing, adequate human resources, adequate financial resources, and that the people doing the work have the power and the authority to drive change. Now, a lot of what I'm sharing with you here, we could take out the acronym DEI and just call this valuing work. And so no matter what our work tasks are throughout the day, if we're the person who is charged with leading the latest PR campaign or rolling out the latest employee initiatives focused on, benefits, all of these ideas are really important to us as individuals in our workplaces. We want to feel like we're adequately staffed. We want to feel like we have adequate financial resources. We want to feel like our work makes an impact and that we have the power and the authority to drive any change that is for the better, not only of our own livelihood in our organizations, but for our organization. And so what I'm trying to convey to you is that whether we're talking about this as DEI work or other types of work, many of these principles still hold true. And this idea that employees at all levels committed to engage in doing the work is important for any type of work that we do in our organization, including DEI work. And obviously, I identify myself as a diversity, equity, and inclusion scholar, but my broader field of study is organizational behavior. And so I can tell you that research says, regardless of whether we're talking about DEI work or other work tasks, this idea of feeling that your work is valued and feeling that your organization values your work is really important for people's willingness to actually do the work.
There are definitely nuances to explore about how to engage managers at different levels in DEI work. Dr. Creary focuses on the unique challenges that arise when involving middle managers and senior leaders, shedding light on their contrasting motivations and approaches to DEI initiatives.
So when we think about DEI work specifically, though, I wanted to highlight for you some of the specific challenges that might exist engaging managers, line managers, middle managers, and more senior leaders in this work. And so it's important to note that middle managers and senior leaders are not engaged in DEI work in the same ways. And what I mean by that is senior leaders often engage in DEI work because they understand it as it relates to business strategy and market share. So there's a business case that they understand, and as the purveyors of and the foremost leaders who are charged with making sure that the organization stays competitive and grows, business leaders often come into the DEI conversation convinced that the work needs to be done because there is a solid business case. But for people who are in the middle of the organization, who are line managers and middle managers, the idea of making the company grow more effectively over time is a bit too abstract and far removed from their day-to-day experience. So for middle managers, engaging them in DEI work is really about helping them to understand how doing this work, how valuing this work makes their day-to-day jobs and tasks better. And so I always like to think about that as the team level. How does DEI work going to make my team perform more effectively? How is it going to make my team members happier and be more engaged in their work? So in addition to knowing that there are differences between engaging senior leaders and middle managers in DEI work, it's also important to know that accountability for DEI work is also experienced differently when we separate these two levels of leadership. Senior leaders often feel more accountable to DEI work when it is tied to financial incentives. We know that in many companies, senior leaders' bonus compensation is tied in some part to the ability to accomplish a variety of DEI goals, not just headcount, not just representation of people in leadership roles, but also with respect to education and training and participating in a variety of activities that support the broader overarching DEI strategy. For middle managers, though, I would say it's not as a common practice in many organizations I study or work with to tie their work to financial incentives. Increasingly so, organizations are tying middle managers' performance to the execution of DEI roles, knowing that performance evaluations are often used to determine promotions and important career opportunities. And so when we think about middle managers and tying their accomplishment of DEI goals to some aspect of their evaluation, one of the things that becomes really interesting from middle managers' perspective is the questions that they will have around equity. If it's the case that I'm being asked to do this work, is it going to be valued as much as my other work? And if it's not seen as valued, if I as a middle manager am not held accountable to doing this work, like the other tasks I have assigned, it becomes deprioritized, which is what I've found often in my research. And many of you probably have found this in your organizations as well. And so this merit framework that I'm going to introduce you to in just a few moments is designed to help us think about how do we engage middle managers and senior leaders, whether you are in HR or not. How do we engage them more in doing this work? And this idea of HR leading the way when it comes to DEI is really a function of also understanding HR's place in this broader conversation. And I would say, as we think about middle managers and we think about senior leaders, I think we can also think about HR leaders as being those who are in the middle ranks of their organization, but also HR leaders who are in much more senior positions.
Dr. Creary explores the concept of meritocracy and its practical applications within organizations. Merit, as a guiding principle, emphasizes fair distribution of rewards based on individuals' actual contributions and efforts. But we'll unpack why applying this principle is often complex, with certain types of work being subjectively valued more than others. This will shed light on how DEI work is positioned and perceived in the merit framework.
When we think about the idea of merit, there's a whole body of research on meritocracy, merit-based rewards, what that means. So I'm going to tell you what it means, and then I'm going to also help you to understand how it's experienced in organizations. And so the idea of merit means that, to be fair, rewards are distributed based on people's actual contributions, their actual efforts. And that if we're really engaging in merit-based practices, we're acknowledging that there's equal rewards for equal work. And we often hear this when we talk about pay equity. But this idea of merit-based rewards and pay equity would be, if I do the same job as the next person, we should be getting paid relatively similarly. And so this idea of merit is actually assuming that efforts and rewards can actually be codified. And by that, I mean that we can measure these things systematically across groups of people. Now, in practice, what I'm seeing in my research and what many organizations are experiencing is that we often determine some types of work as being much more worthy of merit than other types of work. What I mean by that is certain work subjectively feels that it's inherently more valuable and worthy of being rewarded than other types of work. And in this case, in many of our organizations, DEI work is not often positioned as equally valuable as some of the other tasks that we have. And that's not just by us as individuals, it's often by our organizations. And so then you ask me, Stephanie, so what are the consequences? Well, the consequences of that is people are not going to do it. If it's not treated as comparable to or valued or rated as high of a priority as my other tasks, then I'm not going to engage in the DEI work. And then DEI work is not going to be perceived as merit-worthy. The downsides to all this is we know that DEI work is real work and it takes a lot of work. And so what would it look like if many more of us were champions for making sure that when people do DEI work, they are rewarded for it, just like they are rewarded for their other work tasks? So that's my primary thesis, and I'm going to unpack this merit framework for you as we go along.
She illustrates this framework through the acronym MERIT, MERIT. Each letter represents a fundamental principle aimed at instilling value and actionability within the realm of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Starting with M, she dissects how setting tangible objectives and using evidence-based approaches can lead to concrete and measurable progress in the pursuit of inclusive workplaces.
So each letter in the word merit stands for what I think is an important principle as we're thinking about engaging more leaders and managers in DEI work and really valuing this work that we need people and we want people in our organizations to do. So M stands for make DEI goals and work actionable, measurable, and evidence-based. Now, it probably isn't surprising to you that as a professor who's a social scientist, that I am going to talk about actions and measurement and evidence-based. And I would say it's so important because DEI work does not have to be abstract. It does not have to be fuzzy, as long as we think very specifically about what are the goals that we want people to accomplish. And again, there are a variety of goals. In many organizations, they always start with representation goals, and that's fine. Many of our organizations are subject to federal laws in our respective countries around making sure that we are accounting for the representation of different groups. So it goes without saying that that's always the first place where many companies start. But there are many inputs to changing representation that should also be measured. In many cases, many of our organizations conduct annual inclusion or culture engagement surveys. Those have numbers attached to them. They have scores. And so what would it look like to establish goals around what the inclusion score should be next year when the survey is run again? And then certainly I'm talking about annual goals. We could also have quarterly goals as well. The point here is that DEI work needs to be concrete and practical and measurable if we want people to engage in it. Now, I always talk about evidence-based. So in so many cases, I think many of us have really bright ideas for what we should be doing tactically in our organizations in order to achieve goals. And so, for example, we might decide, let's have a speaker series, right? Because we believe that speaker series is going to help drive people's sense of engagement in this company. The speaker series becomes evidence-based once we actually look to see if people's engagement changed as a result of participating in a speaker series. And so that becomes really important. It's not just to put activities out there to develop and implement them, but to go back and to measure to see if they're actually having the desired effect on our culture or whatever other outcomes we're trying to measure. And so what would this look like from a roles and responsibilities perspective? Well, if you're a CEO or a senior leader in some capacity, this means that you have to set these goals and that these goals can focus on a variety of workplace culture outcomes, such as the ones I've already mentioned: inclusion, engagement, belonging, and et cetera. For mid-level managers who don't often set the goals at the organizational level, what mid-level managers can do is actually take these broader organizational goals and set them for the team level. And what would it look like to begin to capture inclusion, engagement, and belonging and share that progress with the team throughout the year or quarterly, if that makes more sense.
She next focuses on how to elevate DEI work internally and externally. DEI is often seen as invisible. Bringing visibility to it is vital for recognizing and reinforcing its importance, especially for managers and leaders. From involving CEOs in strategy setting and maintaining accountability to considering budget and resources, Dr. Creary explores the strategies needed to elevate DEI work so that it has a meaningful impact within organizations.
E stands for elevate DEI work internally and externally. So DEI work is often considered invisible work. And when something is invisible, as many of you know, people don't recognize it as being important. And so in order to engage more people in doing this work, particularly at the management and the leadership level, elevating this work by making it visible internally and externally becomes really important. When people can see that it's being done and they can see progress that's being made, even if it's small progress, then it becomes a reinforcement strategy. And so elevating it would also take making sure that there's the appropriate budget and the resources to do the work that then needs to be made visible. From the perspective of senior leaders and CEOs, this might mean making sure that the CEO is not just getting a report out on how the DEI efforts are going, but is fundamentally involved in helping to set the strategy and helping to maintain accountability amongst his, her, or their senior leadership team. And then that also means, as we're thinking about budgeting and resources, to begin to understand what that looks like. People always ask me, how much money should a company have in order to drive effective DEI engagement strategy? And that's such a complicated question because it depends, right? It depends on like what types of activities are you engaging in? How big is your organization, right? How much are you willing to spend? But what I usually say is it's probably more than you think it is, right? It's probably way more money than you think it is. And so market comparisons often become really important. And I think this is where I love engaging with the broader HR and DEI communities. I've engaged with these two communities in a variety of different consortia, and they often openly, willingly share their not only tactics around how to increase their budget and their spend on this work, but they often share with peers what size budget that they have for this work. And so that's often how the market comparison information is received. Mid-level managers developing team-level DEI initiatives, such as training for your team members related to DEI, sharing stories about your experiences with DEI. And then when we think outside of the personal, when we think about DEI as something that's important for enhancing team creativity and team performance and team innovation, creating team-level DEI initiatives that are focused on making the ideation process, the process of creating new ideas for the team, a more effective diversity initiative is something that's really important. And then with respect to mid-level managers, encouraging mid-level managers to report out their DEI work in their performance review processes. So when we're talking about how much your team had accomplished in the widgets and whatever services you've provided, to say, here's all the DEI work that I have done this year, and putting that in the performance review process becomes important as well.
The merit framework then highlights shifting the focus from mere awareness to tangible behavior change through training. These trainings provide a crucial platform for individuals to showcase and improve their competencies in implementing DEI principles. She explores the significance of these behavior-based trainings, particularly in managerial activities such as hiring practices, feedback delivery, unbiased performance management, and mentorship programs.
R is require leaders and managers to participate in behavior-based DEI trainings. And so what I mean by behavior-based DEI trainings, I mean DEI trainings that are focused on changing behavior. It is part awareness building, but also part behavior-based. It's part behavior-based because we're not actually asking you to demonstrate a behavior during the course of the training, but what I'm sharing with you are tactics that you can use that behaviorally might be different from those that you're already engaging in. And so more trainings where people are taught, not only told what they should do, which is what we're doing here today, but people actually are expected to show that they are doing these things and to demonstrate competency in these behaviors. Those are more effective in driving change in organizations than trainings that are just focused on knowledge. But it goes without saying, I always tell people as a professor, people can't learn the behaviors that they need to engage in unless you actually give them the knowledge and build their awareness on the topic first. So it's not that we shouldn't be building people's awareness at all. It's that we also need to tack onto our awareness building efforts concrete ideas of the behaviors that we want to see different as a result of the training. And so CEOs and senior leaders should require leaders and managers to attend these behavior-based trainings that are focused on core managerial activities. So these are behavior-based trainings focused on hiring practices, giving effective and constructive feedback, and engaging in equitable and non-biased performance management practices, and engaging in effective mentoring and sponsorship programs. But it also becomes important to share this with someone else because that might motivate them to continue to seek out internal DEI learning to help improve their ability to be effective in doing this work.
Many passionate individuals, especially students and young professionals, are eager to contribute to DEI strategies within organizations, but often lack a clear pathway to do so. Dr. Creary talks about the significance of identifying and empowering these individuals, including creating ambassador or champion programs to drive DEI initiatives at various organizational levels. As far as her I in merit, here's what she has to say.
I stands for Identify Leaders and Non-Managerial Employees willing to serve as DEI sponsors. I work with hundreds of students, undergraduate and MBA students every day. And these students are so passionate about DEI work, and they are just waiting for an opportunity to contribute to the DEI strategy in your organization. But it's often not clear what the pathway is for their contributions. And so some companies that I have studied have created what they call ambassador or champion programs for non-managerial employees who are, between 0 and 5 years out of school, who want to contribute to their organization's DEI work. And oftentimes that's translating big abstract initiatives into team level initiatives. And so beginning to identify other people, especially those who are not typically charged with this work, becomes really important for implementing these DEI goals. Senior leaders and CEO at this level, being a champion becomes really important. Sending green signals is really important. And so that means engaging and participating in DEI councils, sponsoring employee resource groups, and participating in formal sponsorship programs. Mid-level managers, this can include implementing this ambassador program at your team level.
In the final aspect of this framework, Dr. Creary emphasizes integrating DEI work as a core responsibility rather than a peripheral task or side hustle. Recognizing the importance of title, reporting relationships, and performance evaluation in reflecting this emphasis, we underline the need for DEI to be central to job roles at all organizational levels.
One of my favorite parts of this framework is the T, treating DEI work as core work and not peripheral work. DEI work is not a side hustle to our real jobs. And the more that we treat this DEI work as core and as part of our activity and our jobs, the more that people will be willing to do this work. And so that means if we are doing DEI work, our titles and our reporting relationships need to reflect that this work is important. It needs to be included in our performance management processes. And so at the senior leader level, CEO level, this might mean that in your organization, having the DEI leader report in as part of the C-suite, that sends the signals that this DEI work, it is a senior leader responsibility. And then certainly at the mid-level manager, making sure that their performance evaluation includes DEI as a core competency, and their ability to engage team members and develop their team members' DEI competencies as a core competency is something that's really important as well.
Dr. Creary covered a lot of incredibly valuable information in the merit framework as it pertains to DEI. In the end, it's all about action and impact. So let's summarize what you can do with this knowledge in your organization. First off, set actionable goals. Develop clear, achievable DEI objectives for your team or department. Whether it's improving representation or fostering a more inclusive culture, make sure these goals are measurable and that the performance can be monitored. Next, understand that visibility is crucial, and advocacy from leaders is essential. Make sure your DEI efforts are not just a whisper in the organization, but a resounding shout. Involve your CEO, your senior leaders. Let their commitment be visible and inspiring. Implement behavior-based training. This is where the rubber meets the road. Encourage leaders and managers to take part in these trainings. Knowledge alone isn't enough. We need action. Challenge yourself and your team to implement what you learn, from hiring practices to feedback delivery. Lastly, integrate DEI into the core of your organization. Titles, reporting relationships, performance evaluations, these should all reflect the importance of DEI. Make it an integral part of everyone's job, not just an add-on. Remember, it's the small, consistent actions that lead to a significant shift. Your efforts matter, and they ripple through your organization. Incorporating these strategies aligned with the merit framework will drive meaningful change in your organization, nurturing a workplace that thrives on inclusivity, equity, and diversity. Each step you take contributes to a more welcoming and representative workplace, creating a lasting positive impact for all. Be sure to stay tuned for our next episode of the People Fundamentals podcast, where we're talking to Rivian's Sabrina Park about everyone's favorite topic, AI. Subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google to find out what's in store. And if you like what you hear, share us with your friends and colleagues. We'll see you again soon.